Ready to go. And let's start.
All right.
And we should be good to go. Yeah, I'll share my screen
Right.
and put the agenda up.
Good evening. Good evening. Can we see if we have a quorum tonight?
Yes. And just to confirm, can you see the agenda up on the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Lathan,
Yes, here.
Councilor Gomez Moacad,
Here.
Lena Webb,
Yes, here.
Lieutenant Reimel,
Here.
and Deputy Chief Tierney.
Here.
And that's 5 present, and we have a quorum.
All right. Welcome everyone to the Traffic Commission on this lovely Thursday, June 8th, 2023. Pursuant to Chapter 2, Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Traffic Commission will be conducted via remote participation. We will post an audio recording, audio-video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive records of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville's website. All right, before we get going, let's kind of go through some ground rules. Listen to the other side, focus on issues, not personalities, avoid questioning motives, and let's be polite. Item number 1, acceptance of the minutes from the May 11th, 2023 Traffic Commission. May I get a motion either way, or?
I'll make a motion to accept.
All right,
I'll second that motion.
I get a roll call vote, please, to accept item number 1.
Yes. Councilor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Reimel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney.
Yes.
And that's 4 yes and 1 abstain, and the motion carries.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. Looking at item number 2, request for accessible parking at space at 1262 Broadway. Who is here to discuss this item?
Through the chair, Adrian Pomeroy, ADA coordinator with the City of Somerville. We received a request for an accessible parking space of a resident who resides at 1262 Broadway. After some consultation with parking and then with the resident, there's actually a bus stop at that address. And then there is it is also a restricted area due to a future project. So after speaking with the resident, the parking space location is actually going to be at, I think, 6 Garrison, which is across the street from the resident's driveway. The resident is okay with this. In fact, liked it better than having it at I think he knew there was a bus stop there when he applied. So I fully recommend this space be put to increase access to this resident's home.
Thank you. Any discussion on this item?
So
Hearing none.
I have a question. If the space is not located on Broadway, should the item state, should we amend the item to say 4 to 1262, but located at XY address? Or maybe this has happened before. It's just a quick question.
Through the chair,
Oh, yeah. Suzanne, you go.
through the chair, this has happened before, and Counselor, you're correct. We will say it's for the resident at 1262 Broadway, but it will be located on Garrison.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, may I get a motion on this item to accept or reject? Item number 2.
Motion to accept.
Can I get a second,
Second.
Lieutenant Reimel?
Second.
Wonderful. Can I get a roll call vote to accept item number 2, request for accessible parking space at 1262 Broadway?
Yes. Councilor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Reimel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney.
Yes.
And that's 4 yes, 1 abstain, and the motion carries.
Wonderful. Moving on to item number 3. Request to make the following proposed changes to Article, is this 12? Am I getting this right, or 22? Okay, pedestrian control regulations, sections 12-1, pedestrian crossing ways or roadways. Pedestrians shall obey the directions of police officers directing traffic, and whenever there is an officer directing traffic or a traffic control signal within 300 feet of a pedestrian, no such pedestrian shall cross a way or roadway except within the limits of the marked crosswalk. And as hereafter, providing these regulations for the purposes of these regulations, a marked crosswalk shall be marked according to the crosswalk marking section of the currently approved edition of the MUTCD, currently section 3B-18 in the 2029 edition. Who is here to discuss this item?
Good evening, Commissioners. This is Brian Postwaite, Director of the Engineering Division, representing our traffic engineer, Jessica Bello, who worked with me to develop this language based on a successful appeal to this language that was conducted earlier this year. We discussed this at our last meeting, and you had requested to table it for the month, but you had also requested that we provide and develop a traffic signal plan of the city with buffer areas for 150 feet and 300 feet around each signal, which we provided earlier this week. As I recall, the main question coming out of the meeting last week was whether we should change the 300-foot dimension to 150 feet based on requests from the public.
Yes, thank you. Discussion on this item. Anything?
A quick question. So Director Postlewaite sent us a graphic with the radius of the areas. It appeared to me not to be the impact of 300 with the 150 wasn't that different, except you were within a line of sight when you're at 150, whereas 300 you're not. Correct?
Through the chair, the main difference between the 300 and the 150, I don't quite understand what you're getting with at a line of sight. Most of the streets in these areas are straight, so there's not a bend within the 300 feet. But I would agree that 150 feet is well within the sight distance, and is in an appropriate distance in order to stop a moving vehicle upon seeing a pedestrian in the crosswalk. 300 feet is further away than that, thus is more conservative. But it's also further than you can. I wouldn't say it's beyond your vision, but most people aren't looking 300 feet down the street.
Can I request we put the graphic on the screen that you submitted?
I'm happy to do that. Jackie, is there any problem with me sharing my screen?
No, I have it up too. I don't know if it replaced the agenda on the screen.
Has not.
No, yeah.
Okay, I'll stop my screen. You can share it, Brian. Okay.
Oh, there it is. It looks like you have to enable it for me.
Oh, yes. I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to share now.
There we go.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. And I can zoom into any section that you want. This is a very detailed map. And we couldn't cover the whole city and make it clear without zooming in a lot. So if there's a specific intersection that you'd like me to zoom into that makes sense, I can do that.
Could you try Washington and New Washington?
Washington and New Washington. Yes.
Only because in the past I've had complaints in the crosswalk area.
I am befuddled why it's not letting me just zoom in comfortably. There we go. So New Washington and Washington, it doesn't have a signal at that location.
Okay.
But if you were to take, so this is a driveway signal for Clarendon Hills driveway, if I recall correctly. But up here at where Innerbelt intersects with Washington is a
Yes.
traffic signal.
Right. We use that as well.
And so as I recall the conversation last time, it was, is the 300 feet going to cause an additional, is 300 feet around, or is reducing it to 100 feet going to substantially improve or reduce the distance a pedestrian has to walk to get to a legal place to cross the street at a crosswalk, or get outside of that 150 feet and be able to find a safe place to cross without a crosswalk. Our professional perspective is that 150 feet is the minimum. But that 150 feet would be an acceptable dimension. It is just greater than the standard stopping sight distance in the city, based on a 25 mile per hour speed. At a 20 mile per hour speed, it's smaller than that. So what we were worried of in reducing the distance was making sure that when a motorist exited an intersection because they were on a green light, they're not going to be looking 150 feet down the street until after they've exited the intersection. Because while before they cross the intersection, they're paying attention to the intersection, they're paying attention to the signals, they're paying attention to crossing pedestrians and motorists and the crosswalks and so forth. They're then looking down the street for potential jaywalkers. I shouldn't use that term, but that's the best term I have right now. Until they've exited the intersection. They're speeding up. They could be at 20 miles per hour, probably not quite at 25. So we want to make sure that there's an appropriate stopping sight distance after you exit the intersection so that that space is clear before you get to the limit of the requirement to cross at a crosswalk. We feel 150 feet is a reasonable minimum for that. And motorists, unless they're clearly driving recklessly, are going to be driving at a speed that they can observe pedestrians in their line of sight and be able to stop to avoid them. We have 300 feet is the current rule and the statewide rule, and it matches with many other municipalities. So the benefit of that is being consistent. So I think those are the two reasonable choices, or honestly anywhere in between, but I would think 300 or 150 would be the reasonable choices. Based on the analysis of the map that we had, there are most crosswalks near a traffic signal are at the traffic signal. We don't have many large and obvious points of mid-block crossings within that 300 feet or within the 150 feet. In the few cases that we do have that, or where the traffic would benefit from that, and probably the most obvious one is the mid-block crossing right in front of the Holland Street Head House in Davis Square. Those are all cases where we have and we would and we will provide enhanced protection and clarity for that crosswalk if we're within 300 feet, and we probably would avoid it altogether if it was within 150 feet.
By enhancing, Brian, you mean more the flashing signs, extra electrical signs in the crosswalk areas?
So I think it depends on the context. We found, so another example, and I'll go over here to Union Square. So the mid-block crossing here, by the bus stop. Now it's 300 feet away from the nearest signal. But this is a good example of a crosswalk that is still relatively close to a signal. In that case, it has both the flashing signs, and it also has, instead of a raised crossing, it has the median pieces that really constrain traffic and slow traffic down, even if there wasn't motorists in front of them to stop them, which is usually the case. I think that would continue to be our preferred treatment. If it were within the 300 to 150 foot range, I honestly can't think of a good reason to put a crosswalk within 150 feet of an adjacent intersection unless it had a signal that was connected to the main traffic signal and coordinated as such. But I wasn't able to find any other location. Even up here at Bow and Summer, we do have crosswalks within 150 feet of the traffic signal, but they're all timed and coordinated with that primary traffic signal. And it just happens to be that intersection is larger than 150 feet.
Thank you.
Is that responsive to the question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Any further discussions or questions? Thank you for that thoroughness, Brian. Hearing none, may I get a motion to accept or reject item number 3?
Motion to accept.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Wonderful. Can I get a roll call vote, please, to accept item number 3? Request.
Chair Lathan, may
Yes.
I make
Yes.
an observation?
Yes.
The item as presented had 300 feet. If you vote on this, it will remain at 300 feet. You would have to amend the item to 150 feet to change it to 150 feet if that's what you choose to do. Otherwise, voting a yes without the amendment leaves it at the 300 feet that's in the language. Since we had already submitted the item, we couldn't change the tabled item.
Okay, so let's start over. So, Director, can you state exactly what we're going to be voting or accepting or rejecting?
I will pull up my email that I sent around. Okay. I hope everybody can see that. Unfortunately, I don't know how to zoom in. Well, before I spend the time figuring out if I can zoom in, can everyone read that? Or is this
Yeah.
too small?
I can see it.
So right now, this is the currently proposed language that is up for a vote. You've moved and seconded it, so you're in the discussion phase on this item. Right now, it currently has 300 feet as the dimension. Any one of you right now can vote to amend this section or any other section in this motion. You would vote on it. So the way you would change it to 150 feet is somebody would move to amend this item to be 150 feet. Somebody would second it. You would vote on that amendment. And now you're voting on the amended item. And then you would vote on the amended item with 150 feet to be part of the regulations. Does that make sense, Chair?
It does. I just wish it would have been clearer beforehand. So, do we have discussion or proposal for the amendment to 150?
My only comment here is we're a 4 square mile city. and we're easily, as a driver goes through, is easily in another town or city. I prefer consistency, just for the sake of clarity, and as our drivers are not exactly all perfect. I'd rather be, the more we can standardize and be consistent across our city lines, I think the better it is. And I didn't see from that graphic a greater benefit for the 150, but that's my opinion. And I tend to want to have like things not be unique to a small area if possible. Sometimes there are reasons, obviously, but I think this one is better to be consistent across the way.
So are you saying leaving it at 300?
That's my opinion, but I'm
For
one of,
consistency's sake?
yeah.
Also, my second was sharing the same opinion. So that was my point of seconding leaving it at 300 feet.
Okay. Any other discussions? Doesn't sound like we're going to be going toward an amendment. All right, back to accepting as a currently proposed language with the 300 feet. Can I get a roll call vote? We already put the motion to accept in a second. So can I get a roll call vote to accept item number 3 as currently stated with 300 feet?
Yes. Counselor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Rymel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes,
and that's 4 yes and 1 abstain, and the motion carries.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, item number 4, my understanding, Western Washington Street mobility improvements. This is a discussion item, which is, we have quite a few alphabetical letters here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Who is here to discuss this item? That's my understanding is not up for a vote, but just for informational purposes currently.
Through the chair, this is Adam Polinsky in the city's mobility division. That your understanding is correct. So the background here is that we were initially planning to bring these items to you all to vote on changes for an upcoming project that I'll be discussing in a minute. However, upon closer examination, as I was preparing these materials for our meeting between last Thursday and today, realized that there are some things that will need to change. So I think rather than muddy the waters and add supplemental items or change language of certain ones, it made more sense just to get you all up to speed on the project, just for an informational perspective today. And then we will have time to come back next month to allow me time to change some of these items and then to take an official vote in July. So if it works for the commission, I can go through the presentation that I have prepared right now. Okay. All right. So I know some members of the commission are newer than others, but for anyone that was around in 2020, we did start this process and take a vote for some curb regulation changes along Washington Street, what we call Western Washington Street, which is roughly between Line Street and Webster Ave, back in 2020 during the pandemic, and made some changes that have been in place for a few years now. We've since gotten this street added to our repaving and sidewalk reconstruction list, and as a result have been going through a community process for the last 2 years to work through how we wanted to take what we had done as part of that pilot in 2020 and turn that into a more permanent constructed street design for this section of Washington Street. So based on all that feedback and design, I will walk the commission through where we landed. So our street process has been evolving over the last few years. For a long time, we simply, when a street was up for the repaving, we would repave the street, redo the sidewalks, and kind of leave everything the way it was. It was really more of a maintenance program. Over the last few years, I'm sure most of you are aware, we've started to expand that and incorporate more traffic calming and safety focused elements into these designs. So mobility and engineering in partnership with parking and DPW and fire and police have been looking at ways to incorporate more elements into these designs and meet more of the community goals that we're all striving for. So what this has resulted in for this particular project, you can see an overview on the screen here. This is the material that we've started to distribute to residents and to stakeholders around the city. We had a pop-up yesterday. So me and one of my colleagues, Kate, were out in Perry Park, just talking to people as they were walking by on the street or stopping in the park, handing this out, answering any questions. We've been flyering the street. We've sent this out in our newsletter. We will be doing some additional business specific outreach. We've gotten in touch with every business owner on this street at this point, and so they're in the loop of what's happening, but we're going to be continuing to kind of do this final push here and show everyone kind of where we landed at the end of the day. So we've been massaging the design and making changes. The sort of high level changes that we have been on the table for a while now are taking the pilot protected bike lanes that we created and making those permanent. So that would, as you can see on kind of this rendering here in the top right corner, there would be a raised bike lane on one side of the street, which would be next to parking. So parking would also remain on one side of the street, the two travel lanes, and then on the other side of the street, we would have a street level bike lane that would be separated not just by flex posts, but with a precast concrete curb base that would be more difficult to enter for really anything but a larger fire apparatus. And so the idea is that would hold up better over time. It would still be visible and plowable by DPW, but would give us a little more lifespan than a flex post would. So that's going to be a new element in our street design toolkit going forward. So we're excited to try that out. Aside from that, we will also be making some minor bus stop modifications. That includes floating our bus stops so that they do stop in the travel lane. This accomplishes a couple things. It allows us to separate any conflicts that would happen between buses and bikes so that a bus isn't stopping in the bike lane anymore. The bikes can kind of go behind them. Buses would stop in the travel lane. That would also create a waiting space for folks. And then it does give you a little bit more curb space rather than needing to create the space for a bus to pull out and then actually get up to where people are waiting. You really only need the length of the bus. So it allows us to preserve a little bit more parking or a little bit more green space. So I won't go into all the elements here, but you can see at a high level that we're planning on adding a number of speed humps around the neighborhood, adding a number of raised crosswalks throughout the corridor, both along the side streets and across Washington itself, a couple of raised intersections here, and then starting to incorporate things like minor signal equipment improvements as well. So to go into the details of what we will be requesting of the commission, I have a series of slides here that go through the existing condition, what we're proposing to change, what that will look like in the final condition, and then our sort of current construction plans. So for Washington Street over by between Line Street and Beacon Street, we currently have metered parking today at a couple places, a loading zone, and a woefully short bus stop just short of Beacon. And there's currently a left turn lane here and then a through lane along the curb. Oop. What we would propose are a few things. Number one, we will have a protected bike lane here, so we will need to transition that bike lane back into the existing sort of shared bike condition with general purpose travel. So we'll be using this space across this driveway and at the end here for that, which you'll see on one of the subsequent slides. So we will request removing that 1 metered space here to become no parking anytime. The rest of the metered parking here in front of the daycare would become loading, which is something that we had heard was more desirable for the daycare in particular and for some of the needs of these businesses. The bus stop that's currently in front of Wine and Cheese Cask would move far side here, which is going to improve efficiency for buses. So that loading zone that's currently here in one metered space would become that bus stop. And then the metered parking here would just shift back. We are going to move the crosswalk at Beacon a little bit closer to Beacon itself. So that will allow us to still save 2 meters here. And then this bus stop on the south side of the street will end up moving to a different location that I'll describe on a future slide. So we would request that that would be removed as well. So in the final condition, we'll have the loading zone that I described, a little section of no parking leading up to this driveway, new bus stop, 2 metered parking spaces, and then no parking on this south side, which is the existing condition today, but without the bus stop. And then I apologize, I don't have a better visual for you guys, but I do have the construction plans here that also just give you a sense of what those regulations translate into in terms of the actual final product as they stand. We're still making some tweaks, so some things may change slightly, but the idea here, you know, the general intent here will not change. So we have the protected bike lane, which will be raised along this section, kind of coming out of the Beacon Street intersection. And then right now, this is one of the things that will change, which is it's showing it kind of like tapering out in the street in front of the loading zone here. We're going to request that it stays back here until this point and then transitions out. And then on the other side of the street, we have the street level protected bike lane with those precast concrete curbs that I was discussing. The left turn lane and through right lane that exists today will just become one single lane. And that's how we are able to accomplish all of this here. As we move further down the street, this is where the most significant changes are going to take place for this project. So we have a number of things. We do have a number of things that I want to walk everyone through. So this is Beacon on the left side of the page here, Calvin and Dane on the right side of the page. We did not tackle this section as part of the pilot. We stopped at Dane Street. And so there has not been any additional bike lanes here to date. It is just a travel lane in each direction and then parking on both sides. And most of that is 2-hour parking. So I think maybe it would be easier to just show you guys what the final condition will look like at this point. But we are requesting a number of changes. So this will, you know, these boxes will ultimately be what we're asking in the Traffic Commission language that we submit next month. But long story short here is that we will need to restrict parking on the north side of the street. We will be keeping parking on the south side, leaving the 2-hour that exists today in this area. We will be basically taking the bus stop heading eastbound that used to be at Calvin and used to be at Beacon, turning it into one here. And then one thing we heard was that there was, you know, short-term parking needs for Shiso Kitchen and Sweet Laundry and some of the other businesses in the area. And so making sure that we were accommodating those short-term parking needs was something we focused on. So taking what used to be the 2-hour or permit parking where anyone could park in that and then turning it into one accessible space. There's a hydrant here, so we can't allow anything at this spot right here, but then having a loading zone behind that for the 5 to 15 to 20 minute pickups and drop-offs, and then having metered parking behind that would be the best way to accommodate those short-term needs that we're going to continue to see there. And then in the final condition, that will look as shown here, where we have a bike lane in the westbound direction on the north side of the street level, separated with precast concrete curb. And then the eastbound side, we will have the parking floating here next to a raised bike lane. We will have a raised intersection with 2 new crosswalks across Washington at Hanson and Caldwell. The bus stop that I was just describing, that will be stopping in the travel lane here and will allow easy crossings to and from the bus stop. And then this is where we will have the metered parking, loading zone, and accessible parking as you're approaching Dane Street and Calvin Street. Continuing to move eastward. Dane and Calvin are now on the left side of the screen here. You're working your way over towards like Parkdale Street. Perry Park is kind of right here where this bus stop is located. Right now, we do not have parking on the south side of the street on the first 2 blocks heading eastbound. And then the travel lanes do shift over and we have 2-hour parking starting here. And then it kind of goes in reverse order. You have no parking up to Leland here as you're heading westbound, but then we do have a couple of spaces right as you're approaching Perry Park. And then we have a bus lane with a bus stop. We are not proposing much in the way of curb regulation changes at this location. However, there will be some other street design changes that I'll talk about in a minute. The only change here is that we'll actually, of note, is that we'll be removing the bus lane to create a floating in-lane bus stop. We found that this bus lane was not particularly effective. One, because there's not as much traffic here as there are in a lot of locations where we have bus lanes, and also because it's particularly short. We felt like it was hard to justify keeping this given all the pressures on what we want to do with our curb, and felt like there were better ways to sort of get buses through here. So we actually are saving a little bit of space, and we'll be able to take what is currently no parking and add an accessible space in addition to keeping the parking that is already on this section. So what that means in the design, here's the new space right here, which will be accessible parking, a raised crosswalk, an in-lane floating bus stop, and then we'll, instead of having the bus lane extend through here, we'll actually have a little area to create some new greenery and landscaping, which is something that we heard in our outreach was really of interest to residents of Washington Street and the surrounding neighborhood. So we'll have an opportunity to do something cool with that area. Everything else will largely function the same as it does today, but in a more permanent fashion. Continuing to move down the corridor, Parkdale is now on the left, Parker Street is on the right. We're kind of at the bend in the roadway, getting closer to the Argenziano School here. Again, changes are a little bit more minimal compared to those first couple sections we were discussing, because we do already have a version of this out on the street today. Like I described, we're just making it a little bit more permanent and making tweaks here and there. So we do largely have no parking on the north side of the street, a few spaces here, and then we have a few spaces on the south side, as well as a pair of bus stops as you get to the eastern edge of the page. And the primary changes will be over here. We will be creating more of a transition. And because we're floating this bus stop, we will not have room to have parking on the north side anymore. So we will be requesting to restrict this parking. We're also going to be shifting this bus stop back a little bit, and that's where the travel lanes will taper over. So we'll not be able to accommodate parking at this location either. The parking spaces here will remain, and we do not propose changing those regulations. So you can see here on the right side, we will have the floating bus stop here. The other floating bus stop is just off the page, but you can see here how the transition kind of eats up any space that we would otherwise have to do anything else. And then that will transition into the street level protected bike lane. We also have a couple of raised crosswalks across the side streets and a new one at Perry Street that you can see here that goes across Washington. All right, getting close to the end here. We now have Parker Street on the left, the Argenziano School and driveway is here on the south side of the street. Their parking lot is across the street. And here's the Bumpus Bridge over towards the right side of the page. We currently have teacher parking on the north side of the street heading westbound, an accessible space, a couple of metered spaces in the bus stop, and then no parking anywhere on this section on the south side. We'll be making a couple changes here in what that will look like. In the final condition, the bus stop will be shifting back a little bit. We would like to swap the accessible space in the 2-hour permit parking space. And then the bigger change here, or the biggest change in this section, is that we'd actually like to swap the side of parking. So we'd like to get away from the special permit designation that we have. This would still be primarily used by teachers. But what this does by moving it to the south side of the street is that we actually get something like 9 or 10 additional spaces. Sorry, 4 or 5 additional spaces. So you do increase the number of parking spaces in this section, which is something that we heard was important for the Argenziano teachers, because there is definitely limited parking availability as you're directly approaching the school. Oop. And then here's our current plan for the final design, where you can see the parking would flip to the south side of the street. And then we'd have the street level protected bike lane going in the other direction. We would paint the accessible space blue, at least across the bike lane here. And that just sort of highlights for cyclists in particular that they are next to an accessible space and that they need to be paying attention. And then that will lead into the floating bus stop here. So this will all be raised along this section. We are also planning to incorporate a new raised crosswalk for pedestrians accessing the Argenziano School, parents, teachers, students, or anyone else in the neighborhood going to Lincoln Park. And then the last section here, from the Bumpus Bridge and Hawkins Street over to Union Square at Webster Ave and Somerville Ave. Again, here we've largely made the changes through the pilot that we are planning to incorporate and are not expecting to change a whole lot on this section. The only minor shift is just to swap what is currently an accessible space to 2-hour parking spaces and then another accessible space, and just consolidate those so that the accessible spaces are next to each other and it's 1 40-foot zone, and then just shift the 2-hour parking up to the end of this block. And then in terms of the design, we will plan to keep the bus bike lane that continues into the square. The bus lane or the bus stop on the other side again will be floating, as is every other bus stop on the corridor. We'll maintain the loading zone that's in front of that. And then we'll have a raised crosswalk and an option for people to connect up to Hawkins Street, which we would like to designate as a neighborway in the future and make a safer connection for bicyclists and for pedestrians that kind of want to skirt around the square. And with that, I do not have anything else for the commission at this time, but happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, further discussion?
I have a quick question. Can you go to the intersection of Beacon and yes. Can you go to the construction document? So can you show me where the bus stop is?
Yeah, the bus stop is right here.
So is the bus discharging into a bike lane?
This right here is essentially an 8-foot wide concrete pad where people can
Okay, so
get on and
it
off
is,
the bus.
okay, I thought I
Yeah.
saw like I thought the bus went in, I
No,
was like.
no, no,
Okay,
no. So
no,
that's
'cause
the
I
whole
just-
point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
to separate
Yeah, 'cause
those, yep.
MBTA is not allowing that anymore, so I just I
Nope.
thought I saw that there.
You're
Okay,
correct.
so-
Yep.
so all along there, okay, that was my only question, and I'm glad to see the concrete curbs. I bet you Commissioner Lathan is happy with that, because we lose so many white posts. One of these days it's gonna become like the enigma as the, the turf fields with the black rubber. It's gonna be like somebody's gonna accuse us of just dumping myriads of PVC and sending it off to Lord knows where it all goes. So I much prefer the concrete curbs, at least even protecting the white poles, because it's becoming a little bit of a nuisance, if I must say that. All right, that was my only question. I couldn't and perhaps a second question. I'm assuming through the counselor for this ward, residents have been informed, they know of these changes. So, because folks feel sometimes, a lot of times they haven't, but I know you guys do a lot of outreach, you go places, but sometimes it's a little shocking. I know it looks like you
Yeah.
talked to the businesses, et
We're,
cetera.
yeah, I mean, as you know, Counselor, we're always trying to do better and reach more people. And so we continue to figure out new ways to reach as many people as possible. So for example, we had a 200-person survey response that at least got to some people that we got feedback from. We had a community meeting last year after the initial design, and have just been really trying to be out on the street. But we have been working directly with the counselor, and he strongly supports these changes. We've been checking in with him at every step along the way, and he's been really helpful in giving us feedback. But we believe that we're on the same page in terms of where we are and
Yeah.
in the final design.
No, because when we had the public hearing on the bike network plan, some people, it's always, you can communicate and it's hard, but I'm assuming like when construction starts, they're gonna be flyered anyways. So
Yep.
maybe something in advance telling them it would be just a nice to have. All right.
We do
thank you.
plan to, yes, we do plan to flyer the street next week as well, actually, with all of this information that I've been showing you guys too.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Oh, and I have one more question. As we design all of these, I'm assuming DPW staff is involved in how they're gonna plow these bike lanes, et cetera.
Yes, so to that point, we were not committing for a while to the precast concrete curbs, despite the fact that we've had a lot of interest in that for a long time from the community, because we were worried about making sure that DPW could plow and maintain these facilities, and the posts themselves, or the curbs themselves, which do sometimes shift out of place and could potentially need a crane, or not a crane, a forklift to put back into place because they're so heavy. So there are a lot of considerations. We did have a meeting and talked with Jill and some of her staff about this, and they gave us some good feedback in terms of like the spacing and stuff. But generally what we heard was that there was a comfort level with at least trying this out and seeing how it worked, and then assessing from there. So
Okay,
we
right.
have
It's
been
just
working directly with them.
sometimes, being in the world of construction, things look great on paper, and then through maintenance, they don't wear and tear as well. So that's why I'm asking. Okay, great. Thank you.
Any further discussion? So as we continue to tease this out, I suspect that sometime you'll be coming back to this committee for some approvals.
I expect to be back in front of the commission next month with an updated list of specific items to approve.
Great. All right, appreciate this information.
Thank you.
Anything else from the committee? I know Councilor Gomez-Morquez, you have other things to attend to this evening.
I do, but I'm in chambers, so I don't have to, as you can't tell, I'm in a little corner
I
here.
see that.
Commissioner, I just want to flag that this wasn't on the agenda as an item for discussion. It was an item for vote. So we
okay.
would have to vote. There would have to be a motion to table this item to
Wonderful. Thank
either
you.
a future meeting or next month, whatever the commissioners would like to propose.
Can I get a motion to table this item or not table this item to give to Adam and his team mobility more opportunities to tease this out a little further and come back before us with some actual with an actual request?
Through the
Adam?
chair, could I ask one question about that? Because I will need to change some of the language and add additional items to this. So I don't know if you would need to reject this rather than table it, but I just want to bring that up in terms of logistics, because I would kind of prefer to scrap what I submitted to you guys this month and come with a fresh, new, clean slate of items. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know what the logistics would mean, but that's kind of, from my perspective, I think would be the easiest.
Okay. Laura? You were gonna say something?
Yeah, I just as a newer secretary to the group was going to ask Laura if she thought that that was the right course of action here rather than table to vote to reject.
Yes, either way is fine, Jackie.
Hi, Lena. All right, may I get, so what I'm hearing, if I can understand this correctly, we are going to table and scrap or scrap and table this item for this month. What I'm hearing Adam say is that he'd like to come, this is a discussion item. He'd like to come before the committee next month and actually put forth an actual new proposal.
I have my hand up, Commissioner. That was,
Yes.
is enough, is that enough time, Adam? 1 month to do it for the July meeting?
Yep, I'm essentially ready at this point. I just need to update some of the language, so. yes.
Then I would say maybe as a point to vote to reject. That way, the commissioners do not have to vote to amend the items that if are tabled, they have to be put on the agenda as is.
Sounds perfect. Can I get a motion to reject or accept item number 4?
Motion to reject.
Can I get a second?
Seconded,
All right, Lena.
double second.
Double second. All right, can I get a roll call vote to reject item number 4, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J?
Yes. Counselor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes,
Lieutenant Raimo,
Yes,
Deputy Chief Tierney.
Yes,
So that's 4 yes and 1 abstain, and the motion to reject carries.
Wonderful. Seeing no other items on our agenda, may I get a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And Lena? Can I get a
I
second?
will second that.
All right, can I get a roll call vote to adjourn this incredible meeting?
Yes. Chair Lathan,
Yes.
Counselor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Raimo,
yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes.
and that's 5 yes, and the motion to adjourn carries.
All right. Groovy Tunes, Cool Beans. Thank you, guys. Have a great
Waiting for
evening.
Thank you.
It's not a meeting unless she says groovy.